Good morning, everyone. We are here for the seminar on designing public buildings with architect Sachin Agshikar, sir. I would like to give a small introduction of him. Architect Sachin Agshikar has graduated from Sir J. J. College of Architecture and was awarded a gold medal in 1991 for his final year design thesis before setting up his own practice in 1999. He has worked with architect Uttam Jain and architect Charles Correa on diverse projects ranging from institutes in Pune and Chennai, a resort in Goa, houses in Malaysia, church in Kerala, to a brain and cognitive science center in the US. He was also involved in several invited competitions like Legislative Assembly in Goa, Islamic Arts Center in Doha, Ismaili Community Center in Canada, and a master plan on 1.2-kilometer area around the Kaaba at Mecca. He further worked as an associate to Charles Correa on the Cancer Research Center in Lisbon, R&D Center in Mahindra and Mahindra, Chennai, and an extension to Kala Academy in Goa in 1994. A national open competition was organized by Government of India for development of August Kranti Udyan in New Delhi, in which his design was chosen as one of the three outstanding entries. He is currently working on a wide range of projects, and it's my pleasure to welcome him again today after years when he had visited our institute as a part of Charles Correa lecture series. Thank you, sir, and let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Go to the first. Hello. I think there's a wire. Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, am I clear? Okay. So, thank you so much for the introduction and also for inviting me today. And this lecture, I'm basically calling it architecture a learning process, mainly because I feel that the learning process does not end even after we graduate. I mean, we have to keep learning all the time because each project comes with a set of problems, and every time we have to find a solution. So every project is like a learning experience. So it just doesn't end there. So that's why I'm calling this talk as architecture a learning process. Um, I'll be showing you 5 projects today, and I was told that it has to be a public building, which I'll be showing, but I'll also be showing one residential building, which I thought it would be a good thing to show. Uh, and like most of us, I took up architecture without really knowing what it meant or what the profession was all about. I had no idea. And I suppose many of us join architecture in the same manner with a very vague idea. And like this picture shows, I mean, the first year we all quite innocent and naive, and I was also like that. And by the time we reach final year, we become a little brighter. And while we are studying in colleges, I mean, we initially think form is, we're quite impressed by form and technology and all that. Uh, we are also impressed and influenced by a lot of architects whose work we see, which is not bad. Then somewhere in between, we come across books which also influence us, especially this one, and we stop listening to our professors. Then we think architecture is a form of art, and we are really proud of it, and we start believing in it, which is, I don't deny that it is a form of art, but it's a very, very complicated form of art. And then we get our degree, and we are like certified as architects. But what we do not know is there's a lot to learn when we step out of the college. And the first thing when you actually start your own practice hits you is that there are a lot of bylaws which actually tell you how to design, and all that form and technology and influences and other things happening. I mean, it just goes, you know, uh, it just disappears somewhere, and then the bylaws take over. And the bylaws become like a Bible for us because everything we have to refer to it to tell us, okay, how to design. Then we come across clients who, treat us like draftsmen. I mean, they tell you what they want and they tell you how to design. They even send you uh, Pinterest links and all that to communicate. I mean, they tell you this is what I want. Then sometimes there are two designers in the same project. So we have to deal with the second designer, and most of the times the second designer always has an upper hand. And then finally, what gets built is something which you are not really, it's not what exactly what you had imagined in the first place. This was my first project which got built. I had done something which later on I realized that it was completely wrong. But while designing this building, I thought I tried to use everything that I knew about architecture, everything that I learned from the libraries, and it's as if this was my last project. So this is what I did. And then it was time to pause because I realized that I made a big mistake. And I had to decide what to do next. And 5 years had gone by, when this building was already built and all that. Most of my friends had already started their own practice. They had their own cars and all that, and I was still struggling and thinking what to do next. So, but what I did next was really helped me, I think, because I joined Charles Courier's office. And then from there onwards, I mean, I worked for 8 years before I started my own practice, and then I continued working with him for another 10 years, which means altogether I was there for 18 years with Charles. But what you will see next is a sort of a transformation from what you had seen earlier, and I feel that the buildings have become much more simplified, and there was a lot to learn from the master, of course. And I realized that there are three important ways to save a project. I mean, with all those bylaws and clients and other people interfering, the most important points were actually, well, the first one was to analyze the requirements properly. I mean, you have to analyze them properly and then come up with a solution which actually caters to those requirements, because architecture finally is meant for human habitation. It's not just a sculpture or an art form. It has a purpose. The second thing was to, it's important that you study the plot and the context, because finally the building has to go well with the surroundings, and also, especially if a plot is sloping or something, you have to consider it and design accordingly. And the third one, which is the most important one, I feel, is you have to use logic while cracking a design problem. It just can't be just intuition, it can't be just something which you pick up from a book. You have to have a strong logical sense or a point to convince somebody, because that's another thing which we have to learn, how to convince your client, and unless you have a proper logic behind what you're doing, I mean, you will not be able to convince anybody. So these were the three things, like key things I feel, which is very, very important to design or ensure that your project is built exactly the way you want it to be built. While I'll be showing these projects, I mean, I would like to focus on one of the aspects of design, which is scale. And I'll be talking about scale all the time in all the projects, because there are many things which go with the project. You can talk about proportions, you can talk about color scheme, you can talk about spaces, a lot of things. But I particularly like scale, because I feel that Scale is something which a human mind can understand, a lay person can understand. You know, I mean, he may not understand. So if I speak about proportions, he may not really get it or understand that. But scale is something which a layman can understand because our brain is tuned to it. You know, like your brain, you don't have to be an architect to know whether something is tall enough or something is, too long or too short. If the room is small or if the room is big, I mean, you understand that. But probably you understand that because you can sort of connect it with something which is already near in the room. Let's say, for example, if I say a bedroom is just 8 feet by 8 feet, you will immediately know it is small because when you see the size of the bed, I mean, you realize that there's nothing, no space left around it. So that helps you realize scale and understand scale, and you immediately understand that okay, it's not the right size for a bedroom. So I stress upon scale in all my projects because that is one thing which a layperson can understand and can appreciate. So I'll begin with the first project, which is a municipal market in Goa. This was a project which was initiated by the Chief Minister of Goa, Mr. Parikar, and his idea was to, I mean, there was an existing market, and his idea was to demolish it and build another one, which is a proper market with proper infrastructure, and of course, to give more space to expand and all that. So if you see on the left, I mean, that's the orange rectangle was a plot where the existing market was, and he wanted to give them almost 30% extra space for future expansion and all that. And so they decided to take up the plot which was on the left, which is in gray, and also take up the lane which was sort of separate, which was dividing those two plots. So take up that as well and the plot behind. So the initial idea was to build the market in three phases. So phase one was built on the left so that the existing market is not disturbed. Then the plan was to shift them into the existing market, the new market, and then demolish and build phase two. And then phase three was actually for the fish and meat, whereas these two were for vegetables and other things. So it seemed like a good plan, and considering that I was getting twice the amount of space, I thought, it could be a nice market with nice spaces and all that. But when we did the vendor count, we realized that there were a lot of people who. I'll just go back to the earlier slide. I think. Yeah. When we did the vendor count, I mean, we realized that there were a lot of people who have been, setting up shops in the corridors, outside the market, and it was like a slum, So everybody had to be given proper space. So it wasn't just shops being transferred here; it was all people all over. So, and once you start giving them proper space, like of a minimum size, they started occupying a lot more than what they were occupying in this existing market. So my initial thought of having just a ground story structure with some courtyards and all, because especially this was supposed to be like a vegetable market, I realized that was not possible. We had to consume the entire plot for the building. There was no way I could have pockets in between. And not only that, I had to go one story above, which was the worst thing that can happen for a vegetable market. So there was no way I could have avoided the first floor. So all those thoughts, initial thoughts of having nice low story structure with courtyards and sloping roofs and all that was not possible. Then came the second problem. This was these were the existing shops which had 3 meters height and we had to give them exactly the same size. But they also had a mezzanine floor, which was another 2.5 meters. So, which means my first floor was going to be 5.5 meters, 5.6 meters above the plinth level. which means they had to climb up 2 floors to reach the first floor. So it was not just 3 meters, they had to climb almost 6 meters to go up. So no, who would go up then? I mean, there were no escalators there, nothing. So who would really climb up? So I was sure that this is going to fail. And if you see from outside, even if I add 3 meters for the first floor, my frontage would have been like 9 meters before the roof starts. The eaves bottom would be around 9 meters, which means it was a huge building. It was like a monster building with a giant roof on it in the middle of the city, in the Panjim city. So the first thing was how to bring the first floor down, how to connect the ground and the first floor. That was the first issue which I was facing, which was resolved in this way. So after the mezzanine floor, we dropped the slab by 2 feet, or almost 2.5 feet. So we got 3 or 4 steps there, and then we raised the ground floor as you enter to a certain levels, almost somewhere midway, so that the difference between the ground and the first became only 3.6 meters. So at least you feel you're climbing only one floor. So this is the way we solved that first problem, which was the level difference, which was almost like 2 floors. So this was solved in the section, and this is how the plan looks like now, because if you see, I mean, we had to leave a lot of setback space for the trucks to move around, for the loading, unloading. Then there were other services like the generators and all that on one side. The fire engine had to go all around. So we had, the footprint was reducing considerably, and then we had, like I said, I had to use the entire footprint to fit in all the shops and the platforms. So what you see over there in orange are those shops which are kept along the edge, and the central portion is where the platforms are, the open platforms where they sell vegetables. And what we did was uh, the people on the first floor are the people who are actually not really connected with selling vegetables. I mean, they were mainly like they were selling plastic, or they were selling some there were tailors, some were selling books, and all kinds of people were there. So they were shifted to the first floor because then all the perishable goods were kept on the ground floor, and it was easy to unload and whatever, remove them and all that. So this is how it was done. Also, since there was that road which was there in between, which it was acting like a shortcut for people from the city to go up to the edge of the city to catch the bus to go to various other places. So it was like, you know, how people come get down at the station and they just come out, they buy vegetables and then they go home. It was something like that for them. So we maintained an aisle which was in the center, which I thought people will use it as a shortcut to reach the other side, since the road was not there. And while doing so, I mean, they can always buy vegetables and go home. So, which seemed to work. So that was another good thing which happened. And as you can see, the central aisle, where the entrance is written, that's the central aisle. And those are the steps which take you up before you reach, like 1.5 meters above the plinth level. And then you can decide whether to go up to the first floor or go down. And that central aisle helped in connecting the two roads, which is up and down, and it worked as a shortcut. So that was one of the, I mean, you can see over here, I mean, this is, it's the gap between the phase one and phase two, which is more clear in this picture. So that is one thing which really helped this market, I would say. And the rest of the building is very simple. It's just a grid of 6.5 meters by 6.5 meters, which was, the most economical grid for a metal truss, which is used to cover the whole building. And this is how it looks in section, which is that is the central aisle where we have skylight so that you feel like you're walking in the open. And this is the building this is the phase one, and that's phase two, and that's the staircase which connects, which is just climbing up 3.5 meters. And the first floor was sort of kept behind. It's not occupying the entire ground floor, so that there's a lot of open space, and you can actually see what's happening upstairs as well as you can see what's happening downstairs by standing in the middle aisle. Um, So the section turned out to be very nice because of something we tried to resolve, the problem of the shops and the mezzanine floor. The second thing was that, I'm coming back to scale. The building was 9 meters in height from outside before the sloping roof started. So I wanted to bring the scale of one, ground plus one, if not physically, but at least visually. So if you see this, this looks like a house which has a 7 feet door and a 4 feet by 4 feet window, and it looks quite normal to us, right? Because, like I said, I mean, a person can judge scale. I mean, in this case, you probably judge scale because you know the door height will be 7 feet, so you know that the roof is not too high, and you're comparing it with the door. Now, this is what our building looked like, which was like, double of this, but the door and the window is the same. So in this case, it seems like, yeah, the building is big because you're comparing it again with the door, which is of the same size as this. But if you increase the size of the door and the size of the window proportionately, like in this case it's bigger by 1.5 times, you feel that this is again a normal size house. I mean, it's just visual, but you just, I mean, if you don't look at this and you look at that, again you feel it's like a normal size house, because you think that the door is 7 feet, right? So there's no dimension written over it, but you feel it's 7 feet, and then you start assuming that, okay, the roof is maybe starting from 3 meters or something like that, 10 feet. So this is what we did in the project, where I have changed the scale of the project visually. So it's a visual trick, but it really helped the street because the surrounding buildings are not too high, and this started looking like a normal ground plus one structure, whereas actually it was 3 story tall before the roof started. So these openings which you see are just, like the square openings are 2 meters by 2 meters, which is like the size of a door. And the door is actually 10 feet, which is 3 meters in height. And the lower ones are like 4 meters in height. So everything is 1.5 times bigger than what it usually is. And then this building starts looking like a ground plus one. So it's a visual trick. But this was the only way I could save the building from looking too big. Now, there's another thing which you see in Goa is there's, all those windows have a border. The old buildings especially, they have a white border, which I used it here, but then I used it in such a way that the thickness varies on certain sides, and especially it helped in varying on the lower side and by increasing the depth of that white band on the lower side, because the gap between the openings has also reduced. Like without those white borders, you can imagine that the gap between the window and this opening below is too much. So by putting that border, which is fatter on the bottom, it helped in reducing the gap between the openings. So even that played a major role in this elevation, and also it made the building look little different in the sense there's some variety happening, even though even though the openings are very standard and straightforward. I mean, they're just in one row. I mean, they're not going up and down. So, but the border helped in creating a certain, some interesting element on the facade. So this is how the buildings look like. That's the ground, and that's the phase one, and this phase two. And I also created that gap so that it looked like two separate buildings. So the central portion is the aisle which you actually take to enter the market and also use it as a shortcut. And you can see that these openings, they look as if they're going up and down, whereas they're all in the straight line, but it's just the border which is doing all that. And then we also painted them in two different colors so that they look like two separate buildings. And this is how the building looks like now when it's built. So the problem of scale was resolved from outside, even though it was just visual. But from inside, I mean, of course, it did not really matter because I liked the space inside, which was, huge, and it's quite overwhelming when you enter the market. And this is actually a photograph taken from the first floor. And as you can see, I mean, because since the roof is rising, I mean, we got another floor, which was the second floor actually, which was used by the offices. I mean, their own offices, which they wanted, so we could use that space. And you can see these columns, they end at a certain height, and then the struts take over, which look like branches of tree. So I wasn't really worried about how to change the scale inside the building, and I thought we'll leave it as it is. So here we did not try to make those bands of different widths. I mean, we just maintained a certain width. And sorry, I'll just go back. Now here I'd sort of reserved a wall, which is right in the center where you climb up the first floor. And I thought this could be a nice wall to have a mural, and I thought we should approach Mario Miranda to, do a nice thing over there, and which he agreed, and the chief minister also agreed. So we called him over, and this is what he has drawn over there. Now, what happened here is quite interesting. After he drew this mural, which is here, it's quite big, it's 13 meters by 6 meters. Uh, the space started looking much more small. I mean, started looking smaller. And the reason was that the figures in this mural are 1.5 times bigger than the size of a human being. And what we started doing, I mean, subconsciously, was that we started comparing the space with the size of the human beings and not the windows. The windows are already big. So that made the space look, under control. I mean, it wasn't like just too huge. I mean, again, the scale changed uh, virtually. It's just a visual thing, but it did help. And so I requested him to do another mural, which was at a lower level, where you can actually stand there and see it. So this is made on the first floor, and again, the figures are 1.5 times bigger than the normal size of a human being, and that really changed the scale inside the building. So, and then he was so excited that he made another one, and he did not charge us for these two murals, which was nice of him. So in this case, I mean, it was not possible to change the scale of the building, even though I wanted to, but we had to do something visually so it still works for the project and the surroundings. The next project is actually not a public building, but I think it was important to show a residential building as well, because most of the projects we get are residential buildings. And so I just added one in between. So this is a high rise which is at Prabha Devi and Mumbai, and it's a 26-story building. So they have a very nice proportion of 1:4, and these are all the balconies which are, which are in straight line. But these balconies are really deep. I mean, they are like 8 feet in width, and that was done intentionally so that you can actually sit there and have some seating arrangement or put a table there or whatever. So, and they have a lovely view of the ceiling. So if you see over here, the building was quite standard. I mean, in the sense, this was an SRA project, and SRA projects are really difficult to execute because there is no space available. I mean, you have to construct buildings for the people who are already occupied the plot. Those are built separately, and then what is left is for the sale. So there's hardly any space left there. So the building was very tight and very constrained, but the only thing I insisted upon was this balcony, which was the most important feature of this flat because they had such a lovely view, and I expected everyone to use the balcony more than the space inside. Uh, what we have done here is the balcony was dropped by 2 feet. The reason being that when you're in the room, when you're sitting there, I mean, the railing is much lower than your eye level, and so you have a better view when you're sitting or standing inside the room. And also, I mean, it was when you're in the balcony, I mean, you feel sort of detached from the internal spaces. You feel you're in some other space because there's a level difference. And also, this was to discourage people from enclosing the balconies, which actually worked because nobody has, you know, brought their windows outside. And even for the bedrooms, we had this sort of a planter outside so that, people don't keep things outside. And also, we had drip irrigation for all these plants. Um, of course, I wanted all the plants to have white flowers that time, and now it's no longer there. I mean, initially we started with white flowers, but then people have changed, and of course some of the plants have died. So these are some things which we don't have control upon. So, but anyway, so the buildings were also kept at an angle, so they have a better view of the ceiling, and that was the best over there on top. We also, this was one of our first projects, so we are really excited. We designed the brochure, we designed everything for them free of charge. That time they were all hand-drawn drawings, and that's the view which you can see from the building. So the brochure was quite liked by people, so they had to print them multiple times because people just came and took away the brochure, and nobody bought the flat. This is the building elevation when it was built. This is how it looks. Now, what is important is I realized that when you're walking on the street, you cannot see a high-rise building because you never look up. What you see is at eye level. You know what you see at eye level. So that's just the first 3 or 4 floors, and there are also trees sometimes which block your vision. So high-rise buildings are not really seen when you're walking on the street. Only architects look up, I suppose. So rest of the people just look down. And in such cases, now you'll see that most of the bottom levels are used for parking. So you have 5 or 6 levels of parking, and all you see is just blank walls or screens, which again doesn't go well with the street, the context or the scale of the street. So I was very clear that it is important that we should have some thing at the lower level which tells you that there are human beings staying here and they're not just cars. You know, so the whole focus was what is to be done at the podium level. So there were, fortunately for me, there were some existing shops which had to be given back, and so we placed them along the street, and we also created terraces so that there's some interesting level difference, and you see some staircases going up, and you see people moving up and down. There's an arcade, there's like a little courtyard. So all this was happening at street level, which you notice and you don't notice the building above. So this I thought was very important, keeping in mind, what happens on the street or what happens to the people walking on the street. And similarly, the penthouses which were on top, they were also made to look like bungalows or they feel like bungalows because of the terraces which are created upstairs. So the top floor was all penthouses, and that's how the building looks uh, from far. And those are the buildings over there. This was built in 2004 or 5, and they were quite tall that time. But nowadays, I mean, probably there are much taller buildings all around. So, you know. 40-story buildings all around. But that time these were quite tall, considered to be quite tall. The third project is actually a small building compared to this. It was just a lab come office space for a cement factory, and these people were producing something called microfine cement, which is used for bridges and all that. It was first of its kind during that time. So they have wanted people or let's say buyers to come to their factory and understand what is microfine cement and things like that. And they were expecting they wanted to export this, so they were expecting a lot of people from abroad to come here. So this entire factory was built by the engineers, and there was no need for an architect here. And they had this tiny plot right in the front, which of course they were going to design. And then somebody thought that okay, we should hire an architect, to do this small building because we are expecting people from outside and it can't look like this. Uh, so they called me, and I looked around and I saw that everything was, gray and looking like a factory, of course, and everything was filled with cement, powder. So, what we really needed was something that would stand out in this whole thing and grab your attention. Now, if you see the requirements, there were hardly any requirement. I'm just a lab and few office spaces and cabins and all that. And it was a very small building, and there was no way we could have a courtyard inside because there's a lot of dust around flying in. So this is an enclosed space, which is like a small pocket which is in the center, but it has skylight on top, and everything revolves around it. So I decided that okay, this building cannot remain as a ground story building because though I love ground story structures, I mean, and every time the attempt is to keep the height low. This was a time when I thought, okay, it needs to be pulled up. And the reason was that if you see the surroundings, I mean, there's all those sheds and all those things happening around are much higher. So we thought that it should be at least in line with the shed which was next to it, this one. So at least in line with that, so it sort of has a presence, which was what they were looking for. And in order to do that, we had to place a few requirements on the first floor and even on the second floor, like the conference room was kept on the second floor at the back. The water tank came right at the corner as per Vastu because that was the place where it had to be kept. So it was brought in the front. And in this case, the building had to look sculptural, because everything was pretty straightforward. And I thought this should look like some sort of a jewel in the whole thing. And I thought it should be painted red so that it brings in some light in this surrounding. So it was a little red building which is placed there, and it has windows, but they're not like one above the other because then that sort of gives away the height of the building. So they are sort of staggered or indirect. So you don't realize what's the total height of the building or how many floors are there when you actually see it. And the client was convinced and he agreed to build, more floors than required, and they create those terraces and all that, which actually work for them because they make use of the terraces as well. And that's how the building looks. So it does look like a sculpture if you see, and that's the water tank right in the front. And this building has a lot of sharp corners, which sort of I think goes with what they are manufacturing, and it's cement and concrete, and it tells you how strong concrete can be, and what sharpness you can get by using the microfine cement. We used it over here as well, so it sort of tells you that it could be used in a very precise manner. That's the back side of the building where you actually can make out it's like 3 stories in the back. So in this building, I mean, the scale was again important, but it was used to understand what should be the height of the building, not to reduce the height of the building, but in this case, we had to increase the height of the building. So it was used in a reverse manner. That's the terrace which is down there. The next project is Mustifan School in Goa. It's basically a school, and again, the government had suddenly decided that there's too much of congestion in the city, and we should shift all the schools outside the city on the outskirts of the city, which is not very far, just 4 kilometers. And so they gave them plots. They gave plots to 5 schools who did not have a proper space in the city, uh, not a proper playground and all that. And they said, we will give you plots for a very nominal charge, and then you should build the school. And the school had no choice but to shift. But the plot which they gave them was something like this, which is like 50 meters by 200 meters, and the level difference is like 21 meters, which is like a 7 story building. Now, this could have been the worst plot for any school, because how are you going to have a playground? And it's just the slope is 1:4, which is quite steep. But they had no choice, and this was the only piece of land available on the outskirts, so they all agreed to go for it. And initially, I thought it would be difficult, but then we came up with a solution which now I'm thankful that they gave this plot with such a steep slope because it really helped us in designing the building. So this was a plot when I went to see it. It was like a jungle, and you could hardly go a few meters inside. So we relied upon the contour survey which was given to us. Now, when children go to school, I mean, usually, I mean, they start at the age of 4. They're very small, and that's the first time when they are actually stepping out of their houses all alone, and they're really scared. So, and most of our school buildings, especially in Bombay, you see they're like huge buildings. So, they're very intimidating for the child, and they do not really like where they're going. And this is a picture of a house in Goa with a small courtyard. And I was thinking that if this was a school, maybe slightly bigger, but if this was a school, I'm sure the child wouldn't mind going to a school all alone, because this has a certain scale, and this is what we should try to sort of retain in this new school. Have a scale which the child would love going to, especially when they're small. So I showed my client this image, and I said, our school should look like this. Of course, it can't be so small, but something like this. So we started off with the size of a classroom, and now since the school had to build this building on their own with no help from the government, they were all depending on donations and things like that. Uh, so they were very very sort of clear that the cost of construction has to be as low as possible. We cannot afford to build something extravagant and which will cost money. So we started with a very compact size of a classroom because there were 3,000 students in this school, starting from KG to up to 10th, 12th standard. So we said, okay, we'll start with the most compact size for a classroom and then take up from there. So the classroom was designed first. Then the classrooms are placed around the courtyard, you know. So considering that we had only 50 meters width and leaving 6 meters on both sides, whatever was remaining in between was used for these, for as the width of the building. And so after placing the classrooms, we took the corridor as wide as possible, and then we got the size of a courtyard, which was around 16 by 14 meters, which is ideal for ground plus one structure. you know. So that was the minimum size of the courtyard which I wanted, so and we could get it. And then the blue rectangles which you see, I mean, either they are open or they are used for labs or something like that. So this was a module which was created, and the four corners, the red corners, are basically the staircases and the toilet, the service course and all that, toilets, you know. So this was the module. Then this is how I could multiply, and you realize that the in-between part is overlapping. You know, so that the red portion and the blue and again the red, they are overlapping. So this way, we could, if this was the first module, which was the first courtyard, the second one was overlapping so that you can connect, you know, the staircases connect and you can walk down to the next courtyard, next level, and then the third. So the building was in a stepped manner, which actually went as per the slope of the site. And the good thing about this is when you enter the school from the top, you think it's a ground plus one structure. Because when you're in the courtyard, you see just a ground plus one structure. When you reach the end, you see there's another courtyard below, you know, which was quite a surprise, and you don't realize it from the when you enter the school. And when you go down to the next level, it's again you think it's a ground plus one structure because you don't realize that the third courtyard below, or you know, the courtyard up there. So what you see is that at least the three sides look like ground plus one, and the same thing happens when you're in the third courtyard. So the scale was maintained in all the three courtyards, and even though altogether it's like 6 floors, you always feel you are in a ground plus one structure. So that was the whole idea which seemed to work on this plot, and we also got flat surfaces for people, for children to play and all that. And that's a typical section through one of the courtyards. As you can see, I mean, the roof is brought right down as much as possible, so that you know, the distance is just 4.5 meters from the eaves bottom uh, to the floor. So it's just 4.5 meters. So it's, you know, it's not 6 meters or something. And the floor to floor height is 3.6, which was as per rules for a school, for a classroom. And you can see somewhere, in some cases, we have kept this open, this part of written as stilt, so that from the courtyard you get, I mean, from the stilt area, you get the breeze flowing through the courtyard and right out. And also when you come to the end, you can see the next courtyard, which was at a level, next level. So it's again a very simple building, but the whole idea of keeping the scale as ground plus one has made the school look different from the other schools, because if you see the other schools which are next to us, they have built a 6-story building right at this level, and in the remaining area has got stilts which they don't know what to do about it. So they have just considered it as a flat land and built gone high, whereas we have gone down. These are some views of the school, I mean, done by a student. So this is the entrance court where you enter, before you enter the school. So there are two wings which has all the admin, you know, the offices and all that. So the parents don't really have to enter the school, but they can straight away enter the offices and do their work and go out. Also, when the buses come to pick them up, I mean, the children can gather in the front courtyard, the front open space, before they get into the bus, so they don't, you know, stand on the footpath. So this is where you enter the entrance lobby. I mean, there's not like an enclosed lobby, more like a stilt area, and that's the back which you see. I mean, it's all open, so you can see the next courtyard, which is 2 levels down. And that's the size of a court, which is 16 by 14 meters. Like I said, it's very nice for a ground plus one structure. Now, you know, this happens in real life now. So when we designed the school, and we all are very happy and excited, like how this thing was cracked, the whole design problem was resolved, and we then realized we had started making the working drawings also, and then suddenly we were told one day that, oh, there's a line passing through the plot, and it's a no development zone, and you cannot build in that area. Which now this orange patch which you see is, it's taking away almost 25% of the plot, and our third courtyard was overlapping into that area. So the client said, "Oh, you can't build." So we said, "Arik, I mean, the government has given you this land, and of course they should have known that there's a line passing through this plot. I mean, how can they just give it to you like that?" So we thought, okay, we'll go and convince the chief minister, show him the presentation, and tell him how beautiful the school is and how it works, and maybe they should shift that line just a little outside, and it's just an imaginary line because what that line said was you cannot build on a slope which is more than 1 is to 4. And our entire plot was actually 1 is to 4. So that line did not make any sense. I mean, it was just drawn using Google Maps or something. So ideally, this line should have been here somewhere, So because the entire plot was 1 is to 4. So since it's somewhere in between, why not shift it outside? But the chief minister did not want to, ruffle any feathers. So he said, no, let it be. I mean, what I can do for you, I can make the plot wider. So he shifted the other schools a little bit on the left, and he made our plot wider, which means we had to redesign the school. And after convincing ourselves that this was the best solution for a school, the way it was designed, it was very difficult for us to come out of it. We had to actually, we were in a state of a shock, I would say. So, but we had no choice. Now the plot had become wider, and we had this wonderful concept which was just getting disturbed because we did not have the length. But what we did was we had to accept what it was, and so instead of having three courtyards going down, we have two courtyards now side by side, and the next courtyard is again down there. So it become a basketball court now. It's as big as a basketball court. And then the third courtyard is not actually a courtyard, but it became an amphitheater because that's where the plot ended. And so the first level is used by from KG to fourth standard children. That's the primary. Then the from fifth to 10th are on the second courtyard because they can walk down and all that on their own. So they were kept on the lower level, and then the 8th to 10th or 10th to 12th were kept on the last level so that they can use the amphitheater. So it still works. I mean, we could sort of save the concept. It's still not that bad, I would say. And we made it work, instead of just uh, changing everything. And these are the few photographs of the building. This is that entrance court, which is where the children would wait for the buses and all. And that's the office building. And this is the courtyard. Now, these are the two courtyards, so it's nice to see them, across the corridor which is right in the middle where you enter. And that's the library on top, which is for the small children, the primary children. And those corridors. And there were some details which we used, which people, I mean, some of them noticed, but most of the time it was unnoticed. I mean, the way how the beam sits on the column, on a round column, and the round column had to stop just below the beam. Or if you see how the classroom numbers are written on a cube, that 8B, which is written, it's on a cube which is on three sides, and you can write on three sides, like this. That was the logo which was put up outside the building. So this is the central corridor where you enter, and you can see it's open on the right across at the end of the corridor, it's open, which means you're looking into the second courtyard. And that's from outside. And you can see the building which is built on the left, which is a regular school, which is a multi-story building, on the same similar plot. So, and this is the last project which I'll be showing you, which is a cancer hospital in Lisbon, Portugal. So, around 12 years ago, I mean, Charles Correa had designed a building. It was a cancer research center, uh, which is uh, which is a beautiful building. And I was working as his associate for this project. I worked with him for 18 years, like I said, and this was the last project which we did together. So it's a very nice, it's very powerful building, a very strong form. You can see. I mean, it's on a triangular plot, and the Atlantic Ocean is right there. And there are three buildings like this, and it's basically a research center. So. Uh, 3 years ago, the same client sent me an email asking me if I could design a hospital, a cancer hospital for pancreatic cancer, to be built right next to this building in the same plot. So there was a little bit of area left on the right hand side up there, which was used for parking, and they said we want to build a hospital there. So when you're designing a building which is right next to a masterpiece like this, designed by like somebody like Korea, you have to be very very careful. I mean, because obviously, I mean, your building is going to be compared with the rest of the buildings, and not only that. I mean, it's not that you want to look. Your building has to look better than this. It's more important that the building should look as if it's been always designed with the rest of the building. Only thing, the difference was that it was built 10 years later or 12 years later. So it should look like that. I mean, now that it's built, nobody would realize that these were built separately. So it was very important that we, use the same material palette or maintain the scale of the building, because these were not more than ground plus 3 or 4, and the language had to be same. So, and then again, we had to do a lot of connections. So we had to connect both the buildings. So it was again very important that I do it in such a way that I do not spoil the building which was built by Charles. So that was really important. Another aspect was that important aspect was that this was meant for patients having pancreatic cancer, which does not have a cure right now. So they're still doing a lot of research. So this building has the research labs as well as rooms and other facilities for the patients, but there's no cure as of now. So which means people who are going to come to this hospital are probably in their last stages. So, and then people come with their relatives who are also in a very different state of mind. So this building, it was important that this building makes you feel very calm, and when you enter, and it shouldn't look like any other hospital. So it was important that we use a lot of water plants in this building, especially so because we were right next to the ocean, but unfortunately there was another existing building right in front of us, so we could not see the ocean. So I thought we should bring the water in the building, since we do not have you know, we don't have the vision of the water which is right next to us. Then there's ample sunlight in Lisbon. It's just beautiful. I mean, it's just always 24 degrees out there, and beautiful sunlight. So we had to bring the sunlight into the building. And yeah, and then wherever possible, we try to get the view of the ocean. But it was also important that these people have a lot of privacy, because whoever comes here doesn't want to be seen that, oh, he's got cancer or something. So that was also extremely important. Now, this is the existing building. You can see it's the three buildings over here in a triangular plot. designed by Charles Correa. And the orange portion is our plot. That was my plot where I had to design the building, and it was, you can see it's a rectangular plot compared to this huge space which we had and which was very, very tight. That's the water, and you can see there's a building in front of us which is blocking our view. And the client said that we want to keep 50% of the plot for future expansion. And maybe he was trying to be a little helpful, so they took this building and they placed it there, and they said, you know, maybe you can do this and add 5 floors, so you get around 20,000 square meters of area. Now, I thought such things happen in India, they cut waste and they tell you what to do. So, but they actually did that, and but maybe they were just trying to be helpful. So, which means this was how the existing building looked like. There's a ground plus 2 over here and a ground plus 3 building over here, and there's a glass bridge in between. And I thought that, you know, if I do what they asked me to do, it will start looking like this, which was completely wrong. If at all, it should be smaller, because this building in the center, which was a very large building, uh, had to have a certain scale, because you know, that's how it works. We can't have like a tower over here. So if at all if I have to design the building, it has to look like this, you know. So there is some balance, and this is seen from the main road. So you'll see all three buildings when you're driving by, uh, which means I had to occupy the entire plot. So when I made the presentation, I showed them that what they were suggesting was not what we should be doing, but if at all we should, you know, design a building which occupies the entire plot and has a very gentle curve, which sort of leads you to this other buildings. You know, I mean, it's not trying to uh, compete with this other with the existing building, but it's sort of directing you towards these buildings. And fortunately, I mean, they understood what I was trying to say, and which was nice. And they said, okay, I mean, if at all we need a plot after 25 years, we'll find somewhere else, you know. So that was good. And so they agreed to use the entire plot, and then, you know, then everything was easy, I would say. So this is the final site plan with the existing buildings and the new building. So the new building is very simple. You can see that it's a rectangular building. Finally, it's a hospital. We had to follow a certain grid, which was 8 meter by 9 meters, so that the rooms fit in properly. And what I've done is I've just taken a gentle curve so that goes with the rest of the buildings and brought water into the building. You know, so we have two large courtyards with uh, water body. It's a shallow water body, and the thing is that you enter the lobby and you see water, and you walk around the hospital, and everywhere you keep, you know, you get a vision of the water, and you can actually step out and sit under those trees with shallow water body right next to you, because the weather is so beautiful. So while the patients are actually waiting for the consultation or day hospital, I mean, they actually sit outside in the sunlight, which is again very useful, and wait for the turn to be called in. Similarly, on the other side was the research labs, and the lab was also very close to the water body, and people, you know, take a break and come out and sit on that side. So in a way, it was helping, and this entire building was raised by 3.5 meters from the road level, because we are so close to the ocean and the water table was very high. So the first floor is actually, or let's say the ground floor is actually 3.5 meters above the road level. So we had to provide a ramp to climb up. So you can see at the bottom there's a ramp which goes up and then down, and it's hidden behind a straight wall with sloping landscaped area, so you don't realize that you're climbing up. And below this is parking, which is actually at road level, and then we have another level of parking, which is the basement. So we have two levels down and another floor above this. And that's the first floor, where we have rooms facing on both sides. The rooms at the back had a water body which was at floor level, and some of the rooms could get a view of the ocean. And these rooms look into the front courtyard, and we have the ICU rooms on the right hand side facing behind, and the ORs are facing the front. That's the final plan which was built. We had a US consultant who designed the internal planning, all the rooms and all that was done by HDR, which is a firm from US, because they were experts in hospital planning. And that's the section which you can see that this is the basement, and then the second level of parking, which is actually at road level. And our first floor, or like the ground floor, is actually 3.5 meters above the road level. And we have the water body, and then we have the rooms on the top. And on the terrace, which is called as penthouse, is not what we think is the penthouse, it's mainly for services. All the air conditioning units and all are up there. And that's the water body, and we had this curved wall which was actually giving it the privacy which they wanted. First of all, they were higher than the road level, and they can sit there outside and all that. And there were these huge cutouts from where you can look out and you can see the hill which is in front with all the houses and all that. It's something like this. And that's the reception lobby, which is at the back. And that's the patient's room with the water body, which is at the first floor level. And the reception was like a double height space, and we had another lobby on the first floor if you enter the rooms. And even here we have a big wall which is reserved for a mural. This is just a placeholder, but this is not actual mural. But I've suggested that it should have something nice which represents hope, because that is what people are hoping for when they come here. You know, they have certain hope that they will be cured one day, or they'll be cured when they come here, and they're still looking for an artist who can actually do something there. Right now, it's just a blank wall. And that's the building from outside, which is like a 170-meter long building. It's very long, but again, it has this beautiful scale and proportions, I would say. And that straight wall, which is in the front with the landscaping, is actually there's a ramp behind it to take you up. And those cutouts and this cutout helps the people to look out, but they are not seen from the road level. You can see the size of a human being at the end over there on the right. So it's a very big building, but the scale is such that you can't make out what's the total height. And these are some pictures. This was built during the lockdown, it got built in 2 years. So they kept sending me pictures while it was being done, and I couldn't go it. I haven't seen the building myself. Uh, but the pictures which started coming were very interesting, because there was this person who was all the time on the side taking pictures as it was getting built. And this lady, she saw the whole thing in a different viewpoint, not like how we see it. The pictures which started coming were quite interesting, and I thought I should share them with you. Um, this is So there are certain things which we take it for granted, and these are the things which they see, and I think we should also start seeing them, noticing them. There are so many nice things around us, even when the building is being built. These are those huge concrete walls which is being built. I mean, that's the building which is designed by Charles at the end. Here Here you can see the curved wall, which has stone cladding. It's a local stone. And this was on the day of the inauguration, which they, of course, removed the water and they used it as a nice seating area, and they blocked one of the cutouts to project something. And yeah, so they had called the King and Queen of Spain to inaugurate the building and the President of Portugal. So now you can see the building from top. Here, of course, they blocked that one of the openings, but that's the building designed by Charles, and this is the curve which takes you, which leads you to that building. That's the entrance. This is the day hospital where they take treatments and all. So that's the road which takes you up by 3.5 meters. This is when they filled it up with water for the first time. I'll be ending this with a walkthrough, which was actually made by a student in my office. But there's a nice story. I think we have time, right? It's there's a person who donated 50 million euros for this project. He's one person. He was a Spanish, and I had to, once we prepared the sketch design, and we had to show him what we are doing, and because after they were sort of frozen. Uh, so this was the first time we were going to show him, and this was the first time he was going to know how his money was going to be used. So it was a small meeting. I mean, he just came with his wife, and only four of us were allowed inside. And there were three people who were going to make this presentation. I had to explain how the building is designed exactly like how I've shown you. HDR, who had done the internal planning, had to speak about latest trends in hospitality and how the hospitals are designed and how the rooms are designed and all those things. And the third one was a scientist who had to brief them about what is the latest research on pancreatic cancer and how far they are from the cure and all those things. So each one was given 7 minutes to speak, and so altogether it was 21 minutes, and then another 4 minutes for them to say something, and so 25 minutes the whole thing was over. The client came exactly on time, and that 25 minutes was exactly what we took. But one day before the presentation, when we had put everything together, all three of us, they said, "Oh my God, we just forgot to tell you that the client doesn't understand English and he doesn't understand Portuguese, so he understands only Spanish and French." So, of course, I had forgotten my French the day I stepped out of school, so there was no way I could speak in Spanish or French. So they said, okay, we'll put two screens and we will translate whatever you've written or whatever you're saying on one side. So I mean, it wasn't really great. We used to read something while I was saying something which was completely Greek to this person, and without seeing what is on the slide. I mean, it was not the way. I mean, I thought it's not going to work. The HDR chief said he knows a little bit of Spanish, so even though the presentation is in English, he will speak in Spanish. And then the scientist said he knew French, but he can read French, so he'll keep his speech ready in French and he'll speak in French. So this presentation was going to be three different languages. And I was the one who was most worried because, if I'm saying something, something is written on the side and we're showing it on another screen, so it's not going to work. So we decided that there was no time to make a model or anything like that. So we decided, okay, let's do a SketchUp walkthrough uh, for this project and see if it works. So there was this trainee who had, come from Pune and he was working in the office. He said, okay, we hardly had any time, just a week to do it. So he has done it, and I think this was very nice because finally, what we saw at the end of the presentation did not require any language. It was just music, and that I think appealed to the client. And at the end of it, he just stood up and he clapped his hands because he couldn't say very good or something which we could understand. So he just clapped his hands, which I think was very nice. So we'll go through this walkthrough. There's a sound I said, right? It's not running. Actually, it was supposed to run on its own. But, can you increase the sound? I think you should reduce the sound slightly. Yeah. So, can you go back to can you go back to the presentation? Of course, the presentation has ended, but just want to talk about the last slide. Can you go to the last? During the lockdown, I was working on a book, and I basically wrote down all the thoughts, my thoughts on architecture, based on my observation and experience. And it got published as a little book, and it's out for sale. And I feel it's a very nice book for students, especially who are in the final year or something. It's at a very low cost. It's just 495 rupees, and it can be bought only from a website, which is the last slide, which is gopalbookstore.com. If anybody is interested, I mean, they can just go there and buy this book. It's a very nice book, I think. And since I'm here, I thought maybe I should just end the lecture with this slide. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful guidance. Students, if you would like to ask some questions, we are open for it. Any questions?
We often begin a project when we are teaching science. We often begin a project with site analysis, and we ask the students to go on the site and analyze the site. One of the things that you had included in your slide was the three ways to save the project. But when we ask them, when they come back and start working on the board, we find that there is always a gap between what they actually saw on the site and what they actually produced. So, can you elaborate on those 3 points a bit for the students? How to approach the site?
Yeah, first of all, you should listen to your professors and listen to what they're saying. So site analysis is very important, uh, especially because when you're building something which is going to last for next 100 years, it is very important that we not make any mistakes. And the smallest mistake we make is actually when we draw, our drawings are at 1:100 scale. So imagine one mistake which you make on the paper is going to be blown up 100 times, and you will see it loud and clear. So it's very important that you understand what the site is sort of demanding. The site generally tells you how the building should be designed, uh, for which you need to go there actually and stand there and look around you. Look what's next to your building, what your neighbors have done, and how it's going to affect them when you build something which is from scratch. Also, if your site has some features like some existing trees or a slope which you need to respect or retain, you have to make a note of it. Like sometimes, I mean, there's a nice, beautiful tree and you don't want to just cut it for the sake of it. I mean, you design around it, like, if it is possible. Or if it's a sloping slide, you can't just assume that all your flow plates are going to be at same level. So you have to design a building respecting the plot, because before you come there, I mean, imagine there's rainwater or there's some other elements which were happening over there. The water was flowing down, whatever, which you are going to block. So you can't just design blindly, and you have to respect that, keep that in mind, see what's happening before the building is being built, and ensure that when you build something, all those things are not disturbed, because otherwise it doesn't work. The building doesn't work. Otherwise, you're creating something which is against nature. So that's how I just look at it, and I mean, I don't do real great site analysis, but some basic things, of course, you should keep in mind, while designing.
Sir,
Actually, I have three questions. So first is, when I see your design, definitely there should be.
okay, if it is working. Hello. So when I see your designs, it is more about, I feel that there is some concept or there is some form development you do before, or there must have been some stages while you develop the design. So I mean, like, how do you go about the concept? Matlab, starting mein, if you have some concept, does it remain the same at the final stage of the building, or it just changes, or what? How do you go about it?
Yeah. See, it's not that I have a concept and I build around it. I feel the concept should come from the requirements. So it's always like the first point I said. The requirements are the most important thing which you have to cater to. I mean, you have to design a building which is taking care of the requirements. So that's the most important thing. The concept is also important, like in some basic things we had to keep in mind, like for example the school. The concept was that it has to be a ground plus one structure, and it has to be a stepped building because the slope, So we couldn't ignore that. I mean, that was there at the back of my mind. So how to make it work? So how the classrooms were designed in a form of a module, and how they overlap, so that I can go to the next level. So because the concept was to step the building down, I had to work on the module. So it went simultaneously, the concept and the requirements. Uh, and one more thing I remember Charles telling me was, it's very important that your big moves, which your initial moves have to be absolutely right, you know, and then everything falls in place. I mean, you should be like a good cook, you should say. I mean, you can't make a dish with just adding masala or spices, that is not how you make. Or you take any film, unless you have a storyline, you can't make a good film just adding all the special effects. So the basic thought process or the big moves have to be right. Once they are right, once you know it works, you will see them till the end of the project. Like for example, if you take the Lisbon project, the big move was to have that large curved wall, gentle curve, and a straight building behind it, right? That was a big move. Now, what went into the building was not really what I thought of in the beginning, but everything seemed to work because I had taken care of the grid, I had taken care of the flow plate. So obviously things were fitted nicely within that flow plate, and the curved wall remained as it is. So there were no changes from the sketch design to what was built. So generally, if your big moves are right, then you will see that everything is transformed into uh, an actual building, and your basic concept is still works, but it has to be right, and you have to know that it is right. And that's again very difficult, but with experience, you know it. Yeah.
So my second question is, sometimes we design something different and then buy loss and take risks on the project. I saw that project for this one. In Mumbai, we have so many micros coming in, and you said you have designed some 18 from architecture. So how do you manage with the micros if something very complex comes in, and then also you have to retain your design standards? Something like that.
Yeah, see, bylaws are not it's not the enemy of something. It just basically tells you that, okay, these are the things, those are the safety standards, you can say that. I mean, there's a reason why those bylaws are there. So all you have to do is understand them first before designing. I mean, it shouldn't be, oh my God, I've designed this and now I can't do it because the bylaws says that you have to leave so much setback. You have to know about it right from the beginning. Then you work around it. So then you say, okay, from this point onwards, I want to do this. Now, for example, in this uh, project Horizon, let's say, there was a rule that if your balcony is projecting out, you cannot have a column at the edge of the balcony. You know, the columns have to be inside, and the balcony has to be cantilevered. Which means if you want your building to look like it's solid from the bottom to the top, you know, without balconies projecting, you cannot do it. So we had to work on the location position of columns so that the end columns had to come down, and we had to convince the municipality that this is required because the building is whatever, I mean, needs that support or whatever it is, you know. So certain things are there which can be modified, or for example, these are two towers, you know, and we have taken care of all the bylaws in terms of, I mean, the fire rules. We've taken care of the fire rules, but the fire officer wanted a connecting bridge in between on every refuge level, which means 8, 16, and whatever. So imagine bridges in between, which would have killed those buildings, you know, with two freestanding buildings. So the way I had designed is they were staggered, so they are not overlapping, and there was no way to connect them with the bridges. You know, see, each building had its own fire escape and things. Like, everything was taken care of. It was not that this was necessary. Because if it was a single building, it would have still worked. So we staggered it in such a way that there was no way we could connect them. Also, we placed the apartment on this side, where the refuge floor was on the other side, in the other building. You know, so the apartment came in the middle. So when the plans were submitted, I mean, they couldn't find a way to connect it, and one was a 2 BHK and the other one was 3 BHK. So you couldn't say that, oh, you build on, you know, you shift it on this side and do all that. So we found a way to follow the bylaws, but again, avoid certain things which would have not looked nice. You know? So, but that, which means you need to know the bylaws perfectly.
The last question is,
Only one country. No, obviously the local culture. I mean, you should know where the building is being built, and it's also very important that you keep in mind the climatic conditions and all that. You know, in that particular place, that's really important. And there are certain things which we have it in us because of our own culture. Like, say, I'm fond of courtyards, right? So I try to use it wherever possible because it works for us. We prefer cross ventilation, we prefer all that. So in this case, fortunately, the climate was good. So I told them that people can actually wait outside under those trees and in the water next to it before they are called in, and which is happening now. So it seemed to work. It wouldn't have worked in Canada or somewhere, you know, it's freezing cold. I mean, so it wouldn't have worked there, but it worked here. And so since we are in India and we know the importance of light and you know, importance of cross ventilation, um, it comes to us automatically, and we try to use it wherever possible. And I try to do the same thing over here, though it worked here, but it may not work in some other country. So you have to keep in mind what the climatic conditions are in that particular place. It's very important.
Good morning, sir. I have two questions. So basically, the very first project what you have shown, the municipal market Goa, in that project you said that you were treating with levels. But initially, in when we are actually designing in our college like curriculum, when we are designing, we are said to focus on universal design. In that project, you said that there were no lifts or no elevators. So wasn't that a issue in that market, especially where there were no universal design concepts used, or it was basically asked by the client?
No, see, this market, it's like a proper fish, not fish, vegetable market. The phase 3 never got built, you know, so the fish market never got built. Now, This building is not like an air-conditioned building where you can go in and buy stuff. It was meant for the locals to give them proper shelter and help them sell their stuff. So we had to actually pick them up from the street and put them in a better environment. At the same time, we knew that this was a municipal market, so it's not going to be air conditioned, it's not going to have all the features which you would want in a mall or something like that. We did provide ramps everywhere, but to go to the first floor, of course, we couldn't climb up 5.5 meters. So we had a lift, which was also like a service lift because certain things had to be taken up by lift. So we did have lifts, which was not meant for public, but in case somebody demands or wants to go up, they could use the lift to go up to the first floor. So certain things were taken care of, and there were ramps everywhere, especially on the ground floor, to navigate through all those levels. So those things were taken care of. Then lighting, ventilation, exhaust fans on top to take off all the heat from that place because Goa is a very hot and humid place. So imagine the heat trapped in that big roof, under the big roof. All that had to be extracted. I mean, all those things were worked out. So at least you feel a little bit comfortable when you're inside. Those things were taken care. So, I'm sure if this building was air conditioned, it would have been even better. But with the constraints we had, I mean, it still works fine. So it depends what you call those. What did you say? International standard? No, what did you say?
Universal design.
Universal. So I'm sure it follows some sort of a universal standards. And if at all tomorrow after 50 years, if they want to air condition the building when it's the need of the hour, with all the climate, the temperatures going up, I mean, they can still do it.
Thank you, sir. The second question is us being students, we basically have a form in our mind, and if we try to stick to the form, we actually don't like maybe the function won't be followed. So, how do we actually carry both the things together? Our imagination, like the form, what we have in our mind, and even the function. Because in this, while the presentation, you were saying that you did had some kind of imagination or concept of the form of the levels or might be of the courtyard, and you did follow the functions also, but us being students we are actually facing issues with both the things together. So how do we tackle that issue?
Yeah. So see, the fact of life is that form follows function. Okay. I mean, nobody can deny that if you want to do a good building, because buildings are meant for human beings. They are not sculptures. In certain cases, of course, like if you see the lab building, where it is very sculptural. So it was sort of function follows form over there because the way it was done, how the thing was moved, the conference room was moved to the second floor and all those things because I wanted that height, a certain height and all. The water tank came in the front because of the Vastu consultant and which was respected. So, so here, of course, the rules changed, but again, the rules changed because of another reason, which I said was the building had to look sculptural because of the surrounding areas, what was built next to it, and it had to attain a certain height because the sheds which were next to it were much taller, and this couldn't have been just a ground story building or a ground plus one building. So I would say that you start with form follows function concept and then see where you can take liberties to do something else to make it the way you want to design it. So for example, don't say, "Oh, I want a circular building for no reason." But probably you could keep that circle at the back of your mind, work on the main building first, and see how it fits within the circle. So you're not compromising on the actual function of the building by having some odd-shaped rooms. So, like I remember there was in college. I mean, there was this student who had done very triangular design, and everything was like angles everywhere. So everywhere we ended up with rooms with sharp angles. And generally, when we don't know what to write over there in such room, we write storeroom, right? We used to write storeroom. So we had many storerooms. So and the professor was looking at it, and he got angry with so many storerooms, and he said, "What are you going to keep your set squares?" So it should end up with rooms having odd shapes and all. And if you're getting odd shaped rooms, then put something like a storeroom, you know. So, yeah. Oh, that will be like another lecture, you know. So, it was fantastic, but there are too many things to speak about it. At all, I have to, you know, talk about it.
When we talk about form over function, where does kind of form come into design?
Yeah, so I feel it again really comes from the site, you know, if from the way the shape of the plot is, or the shape of of how the road is, or how you see it from which angle and things like that. So, or if there is any feature in it, you know. So, for example, in this Lisbon project, the curved wall, which came out of nowhere, if it was an individual building, I mean, probably I would have made a curved wall. You know, maybe it would have been a straight wall. But because there were curved walls next to me, and I had to sort of direct people towards the main building, the curved wall came into existence. So it wasn't that I would have done that if there were no buildings around next to mine. You understand? I wouldn't have just done a curved wall. So there was a reason for that curved wall. So everywhere there should be a reason for. In fact, the best thing is you should ask yourself: is this required? And if you have an answer to that, it means you can go ahead. If you do not have an answer to that, don't do it. So for everything you ask yourself, is this required? Is this what is needed? If you can answer that, then that's fantastic. You can convince anybody. But if you are confused, or if you do not have an answer for that, then stop. That's the way I ask myself when I design. So most of the things get eliminated at the end of the day, and what remains behind is very pure. You should read the book. I'm selling the book actually. It's all there in the book.
Uh, First of all, thank you, Sachin, for taking me back 40 years. 1982. That's the time I took training with the great Charles. And yeah, I'm jealous of you because I spent only 6 months and you spent 18 years. Yes, but I think it's wrong to ask Sachin so many questions. Okay, I'll tell you why. I think looking at each project that he has done, he's undergone certain meditative process, and each project is an outcome of that. So, if you want to analyze and question him why he did what he did, he will not be able to answer. Or, if he answers, it will come from an analytical point of view and not the total synthesis that has occurred in his mind at that point in time. So, I think what he said is right. You read a book, see the projects, read a book. If possible, go and visit that place, experience the space, and I think ask yourself the question and understand the questions by going through the same process he did, or at least go through some kind of a meditation. Okay. Okay. What I found great about Sachin is that, in spite of having worked with a master for so long, he's so simple, he's so humble, and no gas at all. Right? So anybody can complicate matters. Anybody can ask these questions, form follows function, function follows forms, and all that, that discussion which has gone on for so many years, more a century, I think over a century, that can continue. And I think you are all asking for a template. As students and even faculty, I think you're asking for a success formula, right? A template. And that's what I find in so many students, that either they are following a template or they are asking for a template. There are no templates. There are absolutely no templates. Okay? There are no scales. So you have to understand a scale and go beyond. You have to understand a grid and go beyond. Because finally, what is needed when you apply that scale or a grid is what that particular project is asking for, what that site is asking for, the context is asking for, and for whom that building or that space is. When you look at the school, I think it's just right for the children. When you look at the hospice, the last project I would call it as a hospice, because when you're fighting against a disease where you're not going to win, you need something else. I think can bring that person who's at the end of his life to a certain amount of understanding and peace within himself. I think that's a great achievement. And like what a great author Albert Camus had written, when you don't have character, you have to employ methods. When you don't have a character, you have to employ methods. And everything about here is developing a character, and that should be only yours. You can't copy Sachin, you can't copy Charles. It has to be only you and you and you. So search deep within and find out what's in it that you are here to bring to the table. Okay? I think that's what is needed here. That don't ask him any templates. Don't ask what he got from Charles. You find it. You have to search. Okay? Because if you get it on a platter, you'll never value it. If you got a formula and then somebody said, okay, the faculty or the teacher said that, okay, it has to follow universal standards. What is universal standards? So then you decide, you say, okay, my mentor or my teacher told me to follow this. Right? We are here just to handhold you. We're not here to make you architects. We're not here to make you human beings. We're not here to draw the characters out of you. You have to do it yourself. The work has to be within. It cannot be enforced. It's your job. And I thank Sachin for bringing us to this stage. And I request all of you to be Sachins in your own lives. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, students. You can go to your respective classes, to your lectures. Thank you. All the faculties can also go to their respective classes.